Hey there, y'all. It's Darrin, your beach bum conservative. I am going to give this little talk that I give about what are supply side economics. I'm thinking about giving this talk as the beginning preliminary of the Trumponomics symposium that I'm hosting here at the house on this coming Tuesday. But I think maybe what would be best, because it does take about 15 minutes here to do this whole thing, is to just shoot a video of it so that way you can watch it in advance, because I really do want to get to the Trumponomics of the second term rather than the abstract history and comparing the first terms of Trump with the two terms of Obama. And that's in some sense what I'm going to do here. Hey y'all, it's Darrin, your beach bum conservative. What are supply side economics? Anyone? Bueller? Actually, the term was, you might be surprised to find out, coined by Ben Stein, the actor in that movie. But of course, it came to fame under Ronaldus Maximus Reagan. Reagan had done his reading into the Austrian school of economics, led by Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, and my personal favorite, Wilhelm Roepke. As well as Reagan had read the work of the Chicago School of Economics, led by Milton, Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and many others. Jude, Wanniski, Art Laffer, and Reagan's most quoted economist, George Gilder, who went to Harvard, who I think, frankly, today is the greatest sage alive, and whose book is in 1981, Wealth and Poverty, reads like the handbook of the Reagan movement. The foundational premise of supply-side economics was perhaps best articulated by 18th century French economist Jean-Baptiste Say. Say's law simply says that supply creates its own demand. This is so simple that even penniless teenagers can understand it. If you want to buy something, you first have to earn the money by supplying a good or a service that people want to pay for. You've got to make money before you can make demands. Now, although even a precocious toddler can detect this truth, tragically, most economists today are willfully blind to this eternal verity. And instead, they think that demand comes first because they just simply cannot think realistically. As Reagan used to joke, an economist is someone who can tell you why something that works in practice won't work in theory. Most economists believe that unless there's a customer, there can be no salesman, without understanding that every customer started out as a salesman, even if they were only selling their own labor. See, there's a paradox to this concept of supply creating its own demand, because on one part, we all know that we don't really demand any products until a salesman tells us that it exists, okay? How many times do we learn of something and we immediately want it, and we didn't even know that it existed prior to that? Okay, but also, and more importantly, from an economic theory standpoint, you've got to create supply before you can make any demands. Like Thomas Sowell said, asking liberals where jobs and prices come from is like asking 4-year-olds where babies come from. You can almost always stop a progressive dead in his tracks like a deer in the headlights by asking them how wealth is created. Where does wealth come from? They usually don't have a clue. Most of them just prove that they've learned everything they've learned about economics in their progressive sociology class. But the reason why they don't have a clue is often because so many of them work in government jobs and academia, or they don't work at all. Now, how are jobs created? Jobs are created by capitalists, okay? And for capitalists to create jobs, they must be both willing and able. These are two critical economic conditions to the capitalist that was emphasized upon me by my economic mentor, Dr. Harry Veryeser, Michigan's own Austrian economist. And I'm really excited to learn that. I'm going to be seeing Harry at the upcoming May symposium at the von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. I haven't seen Harry since 2019 when I moved away from Michigan. He's one of the most important people in my life, and he's also one of the best people I ever met. He's actually a walking saint. It's an incredible person. And he used to be my go-to VIP guy for my symposiums. And it'll be nice. He always came down to my island in Detroit, and boy, it would sure be nice if I could ever have him come down to the island here on the coast of the shore of the Gulf of Mexico. Oh, Gulf of America. I can't believe I said that. Dang. Anyways, I'll cut out that part about Harry, but I am dedicating this talk in honor of my mentor, Dr. Harry Veryeser. Let's get back to how are jobs created. Jobs are created by capitalists who are both willing and able to create them. These two key conditions of the capitalist are critical to creating effective economic policy. Yet so few of our academically trained economists have a clue what it's like to work in a job that must be profitable, much less what it's like to pay out of their own pocket for an employee who is not profitable. When capitalists have available capital to invest in new job-seeking ventures, they are able to invest, okay? But they won't be willing unless they have a reasonable expectation of future profitability. If they don't see profits on the horizon, capital will stay out of the game, and capital will sit on the sidelines with labor, okay? So the whole point is, how do you get labor and capital to team up and get into the marketplace, okay? And this is where we're headed. We want them to get in and compete in creating supply and, if I can find my red marker, supplying demand, okay? So we're gonna get to this in a second here. So what stands between labor and capital? When capital is able to invest, why are they unwilling? Well, the reason for that is because of the government wedge, which stands between them, okay? And what is the government wedge? The government wedge is simply taxation and the cost of complying with regulation, okay? So the larger this government wedge eats into the profit margins, the less future profitability can be expected. And so labor and capital sit on the sidelines. The main thing that stands between capital and labor is the government wedge. It's comprised of two things: taxes and businesses, taxes that businesses must pay, and the cost of complying with all the government regulations. Both are costs of doing business, which, if they become too burdensome, make future profitability unlikely. Capital is always looking for ways to make a profit. You know, they're constantly telling us we're all as capitalists are just greedy slobs. All we're concerned about is profit. So anywhere that profit can be made, capitalists will go, okay? Why don't they go? Why don't they team up with labor? It's usually because the government wedge is too encumbersome. And so capital is always looking to make a profit. And it is in this way that we can now understand then that the government, by wedging in between and taking too large of a cut of the profits, is the primary obstacle for labor to enter into the workforce and start being productive. Now, this can be illustrated by comparing the economics of Obama's first term and Trump's first term. During the Obama administration, job growth was anemic. Businesses weren't growing, but they were streamlining. They were getting more profitable. They were becoming more able to invest, but they remained unwilling, okay? Why were they unwilling? Because Obama never met a tax that he didn't like. And the mountain of regulations grew under Obama like never before. So it spooked all the businesses, okay? So they just continued to get, more profitable and rich on cash, but they were simply unwilling to expand or make new ventures. And also, we should point out that during the Obama administration, we were all scratching our heads, still trying to figure out how much more Obamacare was going to cost. Another cost of business that created more uncertainty for the aspiring profiteer. And then along came Trump. And the same guys who wrote the 81 Reagan-Kemp economic package of reducing the government wedge wrote Trump's package. And in the cuts of 2017, all of these businesses that were tremendously able to invest suddenly got off the sidelines, and because they saw how much brighter the future looks with a smaller government wedge, and they began hiring people like crazy, and the economy boomed just like it did under Reagan. almost like it were following some hidden laws of economic gravity that most progressive economists simply cannot detect. Like how kittens don't have the capacity to recognize their own reflection in the mirror. One of the best things I think that Trump has done, however, is win over the forgotten man, the working man, and thereby lessened this antagonist battle between labor and capital, management and on behalf of, fighting management and capital on behalf of labor. For labor to start to see the real obstacle isn't capital, but rather government, is a remarkable development. And as the guy who was on the ground in downriver Detroit for President Bush's re-election campaign, let me affirm the accomplishment of Trump's huge win in Wayne County, Michigan. Now, onto the graph of supply and demand curves that run along the axis of, quantity and the quantity of dollars that it requires to buy the product, okay? And so the supply and demand curves, and we'll denote demand here in red and supply in blue. Supply and demand curves kind of work like scissors that are always in motion and cross at the price point, okay? They settle spontaneously at this price point through the free exchange of countless actors in the marketplace. You can think of it as an abstract auction house that's constantly taking place where sellers and buyers are constantly negotiating an ever-moving price to equalize supply and demand, okay? Now, a tremendous amount of information exists in this price point, okay? And in every single price, it signals in a single number the equalizing shifts of the current supply and demand curves, okay? So let's all agree that as consumers, we want as much of the stuff that we want at the lowest price possible. So let's put this down here as our golden aim is plenty of stuff at the lowest prices possible, okay? So how do we get there? We all know that competition in the marketplace constantly creates incentives for businesses to earn our discerning dollars by undercutting their competition, giving us more, better stuff, and with better service. Or perhaps I should say more precisely, as the old saying goes, price, quality, or service. Pick two. You can't have it all, okay? They'll give you whichever two that you prefer, better price, better service, or better quality, but you can't have it all. Well, maybe you can if you wait long enough for the prices to come down. So how do we get the prices of goods down and the quantity of supply up? Strangely, the progressives think that the answer is to stimulate demand, okay? In other words, they want to drive up the demand for products and goods and services. And they do this through stimulus. Obama's first term, comes right into office. What does he do? The first thing he does is he creates this omnibus stimulus package, $1 trillion, just made out of, of course it was borrowed money, but it was created out of thin air and given to all these people that were supposed to take their increased demand, and that aggregate demand was going to lift the economy. They'll even go further into debt to try to spend their way out of a recession, out of a balance sheet that is already running in the red. Can you imagine if we all managed our home economics this way? Just think that the way to get rich is to buy as much stuff as you can? Consider Obama's stimulus, $1 trillion of borrowed money to goose the economy, blown on projects that weren't even shovel ready, and most of which ended up being pork barrel boondoggles anyways. All paid for by American taxpayers who are not even born yet. In short, demand-side economics works similarly to advertising. It makes some of us more willing to spend more money we don't have on products that cost more in part because of our increased demand, and also because of the added costs of advertising them. But neglected by demand-side politics are the incentives to create wealth, to save, and produce goods and services for the long haul. Everything about demand-side economics are focused on the now, and therefore its effects the effects of their policies, they simply don't last. John Maynard Keynes is the leading light of the demand-side economics, and his policies, although often misunderstood, have been called childless economics because they take so little notice of the long-term effects of their policies. He summed it up by saying, in the long run, we're all dead. There wasn't a concern for the emerging generations. In stark contrast to this, of course, the supply-side economic policies, which aim to incentivize supply by reducing the government wedge and encouraging increased competition in the marketplace rather than increased crony capitalism or corporatism, which is when big businesses align with big governments to write favorable tax and regulatory policy to tilt the level playing field in favor of the big businesses over the small and medium-sized competitors. Let's agree that we want more supply of what people want, not more want of what people don't know that they want yet. The wants are always there. Wants are always infinite. That's the easy part. Supplying that want is the problem. Yet we live in a state of abundance, which most people do not understand how we got here. And the primary reason for this is that our schools don't have to compete with each other. So they offer lousy educations because they are all run by the government, which compared to the private sector is terribly slow, stupid, wasteful, and by nature corrupt. So by reducing taxes and regulation, we can increase revenues to the government. Now this is, of course, now we're talking about the Laffer curve. Somewhere I didn't put the Laffer curve in here. I know it's got to be in here, but by reducing taxes and regulation, we can increase revenues to the government, narrow the government wage, get both labor and capital off the sidelines and back into the game of producing goods so that we can increase the quantity, quality, and service of the goods while lowering their price, all while making businesses more profitable and more willing and able to create durable, well-paying, productive jobs. What's not to love? Well, at some point I need to draw in how this actually works, because if you incentivize supply by making it easier for businesses to enter the marketplace, compete, and be profitable, if you move the supply curve, what happens to the price? Okay? The more you incentivize supply, the more you're getting down the curve toward where you want to be. With supplies, with the demand side, what is happening is that their price is much higher. So where do we want to be? We want to use the supply side because that gets us closer to our ideal. The demand side does what? It forces labor to sit on the sidelines and for capital to flee, frankly, and find better opportunities elsewhere. So what's not to love? Is it not clear by now that the common sense solution to our problems is supply side economics? Let me close by addressing the main criticism we often and most often hear against supply side economics. The epithet that it is trickle-down economics. In other words, that the benefits take too long of a time to eventually trickle down to the workers supposedly at the bottom. First of all, let's point out that it is the poor at the bottom who benefit most from cheaper and more plentiful goods, because they are the ones who need to stretch their scarce dollars farther. Now remember that fact also in our discussion about tariffs. But secondly, to quote the great Thomas Sowell, the very idea that profits trickle down to workers depict economic sequence of events in the opposite order from that of how they unfold in the real world. Workers must first be hired and commitments made to pay them before there is any output produced to sell for a profit, and independently of whether that output subsequently sells for a profit, often can be determined only years later. And workers have to be paid in the meantime, rather than waiting for profits to trickle down to them. The real effect of tax rate reductions is to make future prospects of profit look more favorable, which leads to more current investments that generate more current economic activity and more jobs. Unquote. Economic history ratifies supply-side economics because it takes the field of dreams approach to attracting business investment. If you have faith and build a better, more level playing field, if you construct a more hospitable business climate, the businesses will come and they will put down roots and grow like corn in Iowa. But spook capital and capitalists away with big government, crippling burden of high taxes, and a tangle of red tape and paper tigers, and our economy can quickly become a dust bowl. The playbook is remarkably simple. It's just terribly difficult to implement nowadays. But I am happy to say that this time around, elections do have consequences.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.